Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Labours of Sports Coaching with myself, Mark Carroll. In today's episode, I am going to try to make a convincing case for why sport coaches, should be reading more, and more specifically, should be reading novels. That's right, get into the sort of world of fiction in order to develop as a coach. Okay, now I suppose the best way to start this conversation off is I'm going to offer a light tone critique of more conventional pathways of coach development, not stating what they do as being hazardous or subpar or anything like that, because they aren't, but maybe in terms of just getting you to understand the muscles that they maybe don't stretch and the muscles that they don't sort of engage for us as a coach. So when we think about conventional coaching pathways, we think about often like NGB award courses, sort of like content heavy. We might think about sort of scientific reading, where it's sort of objective truths and those sorts of things. Or we might even look at sort of more informal, actually books more directly, but ones that are perhaps more biographical, autobiographical, maybe just sort of like leadership books written by or written about your favourite coach, those sorts of things. Now, they're all very, very good in their own right. For example, your NGB award, it's content focused often, is more about the technical, tactical, the planning of coaching, which is obviously fundamental. Those are vastly, very, very important. Otherwise, you don't have content, and we need that. And particularly at the beginning of our journeys, I suppose we become more and more reliant on that. And then there's all sorts of accreditation reasons thrown in for why, as we sort of accrue experience and go up the sort of ladder, why these forms of learning are very important, almost because they have the undertones of being mandatory, which is something that we'll come back to when we talk about wanting to enjoy your learning. So there's that aspect. I think when you also, if you think a lot about scientific theory, there's a certain there's a trustworthiness to it, and certainly when you think about how focused it can be, that you can sort of tap into evident bases that are around the stuff that maybe you care about or stuff that's problematic for you, therefore that you can easily take sort of good information from and credible information from, I suppose, officially credible information from. And then you've got your sort of like, Pep Guardiola's autobiography, to look at. And again, really useful in terms of like just getting an insight into what the day-to-day is like for these people. How do people who are at the top of their game think? What do they do? What do they experience? These sorts of things. But what you tend to obviously notice in that is that I don't think anyone listening to this hasn't experienced at least one or two of those three sort of many. That's not an exhaustive list, but those sort of three sort of conventional learning modalities that we have as coaches. And the issue sometimes could be that they're just a bit samey-samey, in the sense that you can do 10 and sometimes not feel like you've ever had a novel experience more than once. And obviously that has issues for, igniting the passion that you want to bring forward to your learning. And again, is sort of like engaging the sort of different faculties that otherwise, or at least up until now, perhaps are just a bit neglected for the very reason that we haven't found a way of accessing them, or maybe perhaps because the arguments to look to the other sort of sources is so strong that it almost feels all encompassing. And there's not as much need, or at least there's not as much credibility attached to them. So I just want to open up something that's a bit more left field, and I think it's truthfully it's an artifact of my own sort of personal learning journey, because I am someone I think that's moved away a lot more and more recently to these sort of like wider experiences that I think you can have, and we learn about people perhaps even more widely than athletes, and about you as a person than as a coach, and how you can transfer thoughts and understanding back into our vocation as coaches. So I'm kind of going to preach a little bit to that, but again, in the main, I want us to kind of think about, well, let's think firstly about the cognitive benefits just of reading, just in a universal way. So it's good to read because obviously it strengthens critical thinking. It improves sort of information integration and supports sort of executive function and decision making. If you actually look at, and again, I'm speaking as a fan of neuroscience, not a neuroscientist, but there is common knowledge now, or at least growing knowledge, that when you actually look at our brain chemistry, there's a lot of things that we obviously inherit through evolution, but there's a lot of stuff that maybe won't stick around, or at least could be blunting and atrophies if we aren't still willing to sort of put the work in. To sort of stimulate those muscles, so to speak. And reading is one of those things. Reading is something that does engage your brain differently to other tasks. and because you're putting information on top of one another, you're keeping a narrative thread and sort of hold on things. You are, you're integrating it into your resistance schema. It's then making changes to how you think, making you recalibrate your thoughts. You then maybe are going to then apply that elsewhere, and that's still within an abstract lens, or perhaps still actually in an actual, real sense of how you take information off a page and use it. But it's just it is so good for you, and it does actually create different connections in your head that wouldn't otherwise occur. So we know that reading in any way is a very high value, high reward activity that elicits benefits of which you may not naturally get if you are not reading as often. And then we can obviously even take a step down from that, taking on new information and not challenging yourself to think often. So that's some of the sort of general benefits of reading. So, and obviously that could be gained through non-fiction as well, but I want to focus specifically on novel reading. Okay, and it's something I love to do. I absolutely love reading, and I love reading fiction. I think it's just really interesting. But I do it for both its direct and indirect benefits to me as a coach. So, and I think the first sort of umbrella category of reason I can give is about emotional intelligence and what we can get from novel reading, both in terms of how you understand yourself and manage yourself, and then we'll speak a little bit how you can understand others and manage others. So, if you think about what novels do, they offer access to quite complex inner worlds. The characters that you'll read about, they display virtues, flaws, contradictions, growth, in terms of the transformative sort of story arcs that you'll normally see with whoever the sort of protagonist is in your stories. And I think what that does is it mirrors the sort of emotional realities that coaches face, because we are flawed. Because we have, and it might be flawed in the sense of having good intentions, but we have certain tendencies towards losing the ride, so to speak, or towards becoming distracted, or towards being demoralized, or we're on a journey of some sort and we face challenges, and how that affects us, because the best characters in a novel, remember, will be complicated people who we can look at in order to understand ourselves by comparison, but they are also people who are aspirational often and or have challenges and hurdles to overcome. And again, from a inspiration standpoint, then it allows you to sort of like draw strength from those sorts of really developed characters that you're going to come up against. Now, also in terms of like if you think about our emotional vocabulary, it's not necessarily that you're required to sound like a thesaurus when you speak, but if you think even from a reflection standpoint, when an event happens to me and I only have a limited number of words to describe the emotions that I feel during that event, sad, happy, angry, in simplistic terms, it's just to make a point. If you compare that to someone who's got a widened vocabulary, and specifically a widened vocabulary about emotional feelings and thoughts and expressions of things that that again are obviously commonplace in a novel, because good novels are clearly very emotive, and therefore the authors are using words specifically to conjure up different emotions and to make different, also to make sort of like tacit thought feel very tangible, in terms of like I might not have a specific word to describe something, but there's a feeling or a word that's sort of on the cusp of describing it that does something that at least allows me to better organise my thoughts to include that feeling if it's not a direct word. So if you then sort of liken that then back to the, in the comparison of a coach that has, the limited words and limited vocabulary to describe happy, sad, but now they've went and actually started to look at novels and therefore been exposed to higher amounts of emotional vocabulary. Now all of a sudden they're able to say that they are, not necessarily sad but distraught, not necessarily angry but conflicted, not necessarily happy but elated, relieved, unsure, helpless, these different sorts of things. I know I'm painting a bit of a gloomy picture of coaching, but striving, and that they're doing, and essentially it's going to allow you to have better internal dialogue as part of the reflective conversation, but also, let's say, if you use other people as part of how you reflect and how you chat to people and talk to people, it's further dialogue, it's further ingredients for good dialogue, and more accurate, in-depth dialogue as to how you're feeling and perhaps what we need to do as a result of that. Okay, because there's probably a solution that's different for every emotion, because every emotion has its own individual traits, connotations, influences on it, So therefore, and we talk about what we need to do with information is sort of understand the why behind it. Then that again, I've straight away given myself an opportunity there um, to start to look into those specific connotations and start to trace them back to their source to then understand and maybe uncover what I need to do next. Just through the way that I'm able to frame how I'm feeling, and that's something that's straight away you get then. So definitely, the novels expand your emotional vocabulary. um, that's not just going to help with reflective practice, but just emotional regulation as well. Because over time, then you'll have hopefully a strategy in place, coping strategy in place, something that makes you that you do proactively in response to different emotions, or proactively and sort of and as a sort of preventative measure ahead of certain emotions that may occur, in some that sort of ways. And that naturally is also then to help you with self-awareness, because again, you've got more ways of describing how you're feeling, and more ways of sort of deducing what's going on in the moment. So again, it makes you a more responsive but also proactive coach. And then there's the part about understanding others, because, and you've obviously heard other guests that are on the show. If not, don't obviously check it out if you're a first time listener. But we speak with people who look at the relational aspects of coaching, relationships, the interpersonal aspects of coaching. That in many ways could be seen as what coaching really is, because it's a social activity. You're always dealing with people. You're directing athletes, not just athletes, but other stakeholders involved, parents, other coaches, administrators. You are, and this is what makes coaching so hard, is that there's so many people involved interpersonally, and you as a coach are tasked with managing those people. And when we think about where people often fall down, and this is again, perhaps if I can link it back to maybe what more conventional coach education pathways can't do. If you go to your classic NGB award, you get more content. If you go to your science textbook, you get more understanding. So that all helps you shape a plan. But really, the relational aspect of coaching comes in and how you manage the coaching process. How do you actually execute on a plan that, remember, involves people who are mega complex, mega inconvenient, and are naturally going to challenge you because they have their own thing going on. And you, as a coach, are starting to orchestrate, to sort of quote Robin Jones, are trying to orchestrate a process at a higher order level that is very, very tough. So because of, again, that relational element that's the thread through everything you do as a coach and the actual doing of coaching. So again, how does this link to novels? Well, what insight does a novel actually offer? Novels are going to offer sort of high resolution interpersonal dynamics. Okay, so they are going to, the best novels have good characters that importantly bounce off each other or conflict with one another. There's often going to be tensions between characters. There's compromise perhaps required between characters that, is part of the story arc if it goes in that direction. Or if it isn't, you see dysfunction really play out in all of its pathology. There's miscommunication, that's normally it's there. You see this in TV shows as well. And again, maybe that's as a separate conversation for another day, but TV shows and just getting to sort of have that fly on the wall vantage point of really getting to see how relationships play out without from being in a safe distance from them, because sometimes it's quite hard when you're inside an interpersonal dispute or interpersonal situation to be able to sit outside of it. You don't get that opportunity, and you can't necessarily go up to people who are in the middle of it with someone else or a different group and just kind of get to watch them. It's not always possible to then get that learning about where things went wrong, but you've watched a TV show, you've read the novel, but let's stick to the novel example, where you're literally screaming at the characters on the page to just think this way, or I can see why this is happening, and you're able to be quite empathetic towards the different viewpoints, because normally the authors will write how each of the characters are thinking and feeling and why they acted in that way, and why the way they're acting, why that creates the dispute and maybe the misunderstanding across both sides because there's something missing. And you're essentially be able to sort of like look at things from various angles and for why you see functional or dysfunctional relationships happening, and in real detail with the offers sort of serving up. There might be power related reasons for it, there could be dependence related reasons for it, and you get to deconstruct that stuff at a kind of, you know, a pace that's fitting to you, where you can read back through things. You can reread the chapter, you can reflect on it outside of the times when you aren't, when you are reading. So when you go out from that, you can then think back to what happened. So just this ability to observe relationships from a safe distance with fictional characters on a page, where the author is trying to make them feel as lifelike as possible to you. Like, that's really cool. It can help you recognize patterns, develop that empathy, understand people's emotions and their motivations, and then see what happens when people avoid difficult conversations and all the sort of things that, have clear translation back into how we would manage coach-athlete relationship, coach-parent relationship, coach-staff relationships. It's something that I think, it's not that relationships and the importance of them coaching is underplayed, but again, it's difficult for us to receive training on them, uh, in a way that's really sort of about ourselves. And when you read a novel, you can always relate it back to yourself and how you handle things and what it teaches you. Maybe at a point in time, we can still make a difference to a relationship that maybe has similarities to that you see on page. Or maybe in terms of retrospectively for the next group that you work with or the next athlete that you work with. So it's for that reason, it's very, very useful. Also, just the exposure that goes beyond your own silo, because let's face it, we don't really get a lot of novels set in coaching for good reasons. I think it'd be really boring the way I'd want to read it. So what did good novels do then? They sort of transport you into different cultures, environments, different belief systems. Again, the characters will have different sort of world views, different social contexts. And think about how, particularly in coaching, because coaching is sometimes it's so immersive as a vocation, but also you'd be very much trapped within your own sort of bubble. And that could be not just the culture of coaching, but the subculture of your own sport. And maybe your sport only sort of exposes you to certain ways of thinking, or even just certain people. But you aren't necessarily, to be fair, sport's good at getting a lot of different people from different walks of life together. And I say this with certain asterisks, because of course a novel can also be inaccurate and can be written with prejudice and bias and things like that we have to also be mindful of. But they will naturally be set in a certain place at a certain time with certain people who have certain views. And again, with that can just broaden your perspective and help you understand how cultures and circumstances shape behaviours. And that's obviously vital in, as I say, diverse sporting environments. It will allow you to have an insight into the way people might think, based on their own cultural heritage. So it's just that idea of like getting you to sort of think differently and think beyond your own silo in that sort of way. And then just at the same time, and this is why this is sort of, I've taken that from more how you can directly learn something from a novel. We're sort of going into a novel with the understanding that there's some relevancy that you can take back to your coaching. Okay. But there's also the indirect benefit you get from reading a novel that is just basically about your own mental health and well-being. Novels offer an escape. We've just spoke about I've alluded to already about how coaching is so immersive, but is almost like a 24/7 profession. And it can be suffocating at times because you feel like you're always on. You never get a break to really take yourself out of the things you need to care about. So in the same way that I'm saying that you should, think about what you can learn through novels, you should also be reading them for their own sake. And maybe sometimes only read them for their own sake. You're still going to take learning at a subconscious level forward, but it's just give yourself a break. And a novel is a really good way of, mindfulness in terms of being present in some place, getting a sort of experience that's different from the norm, where you're out in a sport pitch or in a tennis court or, next to a swimming pool or, wherever you coach, you then get a different experience. You get the sort of tactile feel of a book, of where you maybe sit with a book. Is it maybe going on a walk to a park at the same time? You're reading outside. So there's a lot of things that will come with the act of reading that will help you in terms of managing yourself and your own stress levels, by turning off sometimes from coaching. So it's just taking you as far away as you possibly can do, because again, maybe you go to the park to read about a coach that you enjoy, but you're still keeping yourself in the same headspace of coaching then, versus go actually read about a novel, go read Lord of the Rings, go read something, doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's fictional. And again, you didn't get that sort of stuff from it. So, and that could happen in as little as, 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day. You might ramp it up, might be every other day, but just making time for it. So you can read fiction for learning, but sometimes you just want to read simply to escape. And that is just really important because, and you've probably heard me say this in other episodes, but we do need to treat ourselves as a performer with our own well-being needs. And again, not all benefits need to be instrumental. Some are just, joy and rest. So practical advice now, I think I want just to end on, how can we actually start reading fiction? Okay, so this sounds a wee bit obvious, but it's actually really important. Choose stories that you genuinely care about. Okay, don't force yourself, for example, into reading classics just because they're classics. Sometimes, and as a sort of, and I've made this mistake. Sometimes when I went on to Penguin's sort of top 800 or top, not sort of 800, top 100 books to read in your lifetime, and I went to the library, borrowed Great Expectations, Charles Dickens, and did enjoy it, but it was really tough to get through. Because it just really wasn't my style of reading at that point in time. You need to build up, to be honest, and you're reading this as sort of particular texts as well. So if you really want to get into classics, it's a wee side hobby, fine, but you do need to ramp up to that sometimes. Looking at secondary sort of texts and be better sometimes before you go to the full thing. It should be a really silly topic novel. It doesn't need to be these classics, or it could be in a genre that you just really enjoy. Maybe you watch a TV show adaptation of a book and you go, I really want to read the book now. I like Stephen King. I'm quite a big fan of that. He's got a lot of different TV adaptations out or movie adaptations out. And I went from seeing the film first to then wanting to go and read the book. And that could be a nice way of just really getting that, incentivizing yourself to go and want to read and continue to read. So just try and avoid it, getting the trap of reading what you think you should read. So pick something fun, silly, gripping, as I say, connected to some other sort of media that's out there that you like a film. And then use the format that fits your life. Obviously, I think, for the reasons I stated at the very start, actually reading words on paper is very, very good for the effects it has of keeping you present, but also how it can actually mold your brain wiring. And again, please, I just want to repeat that again, go to the experts on this. It's just, I'm definitely parroting this little benefit here from where I've heard it elsewhere, but it's meant to have that effect. But then if that's not you, maybe you struggle with that, reading's not your thing, next best thing. And then maybe you can couple that with going a long walk, or something you can listen to just while you're doing the housework, those sorts of things. That way, if money is sometimes an issue, which it can be as well, because some books, particularly new ones, they aren't always cheap. I always go to the library. I love going to the library, and because it's free resource in a way. So great for sort of experimenting with different genres as well and finding what you really like. Kind of be going back to the first point about finding your own niche and something that you'll really want to continue to read on. And then you can maybe start to collect books, or maybe, every now and again you treat yourself to one from a store, but you don't necessarily have to, be breaking the bank to constantly keep reading for this reason. You can go to libraries and use these resources because they're very important, that we need to protect them. If they don't get used, it's not great. So anyway, try and just sort of think about it in that way. Even short little daily sessions, they'll add up. Just being consistent with it and build reading into your self-care and your coach development habits. So I just to round it off then, I hope this has been useful. I just want you to consider novels as part of your wider sort of alternative coach development toolkit. Remember that fiction builds emotional intelligence, it builds perspective, it builds empathy, and also helps with personal well-being. And obviously, it's important to know that other forms of non-fiction learning, like philosophy, science, stuff like that, they also have value, and perhaps that might be for another episode, because I also make a concerted effort to learn about some of these things. Philosophy is amazing for understanding tensions about people. That's part of why, even like Greek mythology as a fictional sort of text could be great for understanding the sort of how people work in some ways, through sort of like what you can glean from stories and the philosophical underpinnings of some of those stories. Anyway, same as sort of natural science can help you sort of understand objective realities, and can you build that into certain objective realities in coaching, these sorts of things. And they all have their own sort of unique strengths, but I'm just obviously wanting to spotlight the unique strengths of fiction today. And yeah, so I just want to invite you to explore sort of less trodden routes to growth, and just try to immerse yourself in a story that helps you think, feel, and perhaps coach differently. So I hope that was useful, guys, and I will see you next time.